Hello, I'm dancing with the devil today and doing no lighting because it's about to be golden hour. I don't know how that's going to turn out for me. I'm Sam, for those of you who don't know, and I've been in the ex-woman content space for I think 6 or 7 years now, and I've also been a faith transitions coach for the last 3 years. So I feel like I've connected deeply with a lot of people going through faith crises in addition to having had my own, and I've also consumed a lot of information, good and meh, about how to healthily navigate a faith transition and how to healthily navigate life in general. So I wanted to make this video talking about what I believe are essential components of healthily navigating a faith crisis. I think they are things that kind of just apply to all of us in life in general, but with a faith crisis, I feel like you have this massive opportunity. I think it's incredibly valuable to have an experience in life where your entire worldview shatters, and even though it's deeply traumatic and there can be a lot of really painful stuff that comes along with it, like loss of community, I think it really sets you up to be able to rebuild your life from the ground up and really deconstruct all the ideas that you hold. I know sometimes there can be a bit of a resistance to doing that because you've already lost your religion, your God, your view of what happens after death, stuff like that. But I know that for me, realizing that I could be so misled in my religious beliefs helped me learn a lot about my brain in general and how vulnerable we all are to, buying into misinformation and becoming psychologically dependent on ideologies that are not good for us. And that led to me kind of deconstructing a lot of things, like a lot of the systems in our societies, way outside of Mormonism, that we take as sort of just the way things are, and even systems, within families, just everything in life basically was under fire in my deconstructing brain after I left Mormonism. So I think it's really an opportunity to rebuild in a way that can be so valuable. Not everyone in life has an experience where they lose their entire worldview and have to rebuild everything. I think if you go about it the right way, or you have sort of the right mindsets about it, it can really foster greater humility and a greater willingness to learn and, sort of be, I suppose, empathetic to other people who are buying into harmful ideologies. There's just a lot of good stuff that can come with the faith crisis. I feel like those of you who have this chair, I can't take myself seriously resting my arms on these thin little arms of this chair. My boyfriend is a welder, so that's why I have this chair that looks way too expensive for me to own. Yeah, those of you who have gone through faith crises, let me know in the comments what good things came from it outside of just the fact that you didn't have to be in Mormonism anymore, because I'd love to know. But anyway, I think in life always there are levels of knowledge, and you really do have to learn things line upon line a lot of the time, sort of when your psyche is ready, which you're not necessarily in control of. So for example, when you're starting to explore your childhood trauma, it's necessary to go through a period where you recognize the ways that you were a victim of, say, your parents' abusive behaviors. And you need to be in that to really process it and get a better understanding of what happened, and to get empathy for yourself, because maybe before you're in denial, you hadn't really gone there yet, you insisted that you had a perfect childhood. You need to go through a phase where you see yourself as a victim. And that's one level of increased understanding that you can't skip. But then for most of us later down the road, it's useful to come to a place of forgiveness where you recognize that your parents did their best, and maybe better than their parents did, who were even more abusive, because that's kind of the name of the game with human cultural evolution, I suppose. And it's not that you excuse your parents' harmful behavior in any way, but you come to a place of acceptance and forgiveness that ultimately benefits you the most, because it's hard to live long term with a lot of anger and this sense of victimhood, and it's good to not feel like a victim anymore and to feel empowered moving forward. So you can't skip that first stage. And I think that's why, with a lot of advice that's given in the ex-woman space, it's sort of geared towards helping people master that first very important layer, which is incredibly valuable because we don't know that stuff when we're leaving Mormonism. But I think there is always an opportunity to go deeper. And I think all of the things I'm going to talk about in this video are kind of lifelong pursuits that we can all deepen our commitment to and understanding of throughout our lives, should we feel so inclined. So this is my overachiever's guide to navigating a faith crisis for people who aren't content to just sort of stumble their way through things, even though we're all stumbling our way through things no matter what. Control is an illusion. But people who want something in the vein of a blueprint that kind of pushes them to advance and evolve. Does that sound too lofty? I don't want to be too lofty. That's a fear I have about myself. I also don't want to set anyone up for perfectionism or thinking that you can perfectly control everything that happens internally and externally while going through a faith crisis, because obviously you can't. But I wanted to give my personal pedagogy of a healthy faith crisis. I don't know how to pronounce pedagogy. I've only read that word and it's useful. So like, how is it pronounced? Did I say it right? Okay, don't click off. I know that sounds basic, but I'm gonna expound. I think in the ex-Mormon community, we're pretty good at finding at least virtual community and allowing ourselves to vent and share extremely normal and healthy emotions that come up in a faith crisis, like anger. And that can be amazing for helping us process what we're going through and what we experienced in the high demand religion that is Mormonism. It can be really valuable to have a good old-fashioned 8-hour Mormon stories binge, but that alone is not enough to fully process our emotions. We have to, I think, go internal without distractions and do the boring and often excruciating work of learning to sit with our feelings. Now, what do I mean by that? Because we hear it a lot, but sometimes sitting with your feelings can sound a bit abstract and not actionable. And I don't feel like there's mainstream understanding about what it means. So I'm going to tell you how to take this advice in an actionable way, according to me. So we literally need to learn how to feel our feelings as physical sensations in our body. A lot of us are very engaged with the cerebral aspects of healing. We're very good at analyzing, but we neglect the very necessary work of learning to ground ourselves in our bodies while experiencing difficult emotions. And I think our healing is severely stunted when we don't include this piece, because when we remain afraid or just disconnected from our feelings on a physical level, they do have more power over us, and we don't have the kind of free will that we like to think we do. How I feel my feelings is pretty simple. I do a body scan where I tune into the physical sensations of the emotions I'm feeling, because we're so used to experiencing emotions purely through the lens of the narratives our brain creates around them. But those narratives are not the feelings themselves, and they are not the core truth of what's going on in that moment. They can be subject to a lot of nonsense, schemas, conditioning, blah, blah, blah. Analyzing the stories that come along with our emotions can be useful, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And if you never connect to emotions as physical sensations in your body, I think you miss out on a big opportunity for healing and growth and connecting to your bodily wisdom, which is not the woo-woo thing I originally would have thought it was at the beginning of my faith crisis when first leaving Mormonism. It's just true that we can't do all of our healing in our heads, because trauma isn't just about what's going on in your head. It's about what's going on in your nervous system and in your body as a whole system. Your brain is just one part of a larger system, you know? So feel what, say, anger feels like in your body. Maybe there's tightness in your chest, churning in your stomach. Identify those sensations and breathe deeply while sitting with them. Now, what you'll probably find is that your brain just wants to get away from them. Like, when experiencing difficult emotions, your brain is very quick to try and divert you back to the mental stories your brain is telling about them. So you need to be aware of that and notice when it's happening. And when you do notice that it's happening, gently bring your attention back to your body and breathe into what's happening again. This is essentially meditation, as those of you who meditate will be able to tell, like training the brain to not get so distracted by mental chatter, because a lot of the time the mental chatter runs the show and we like to think we can do all of our healing in our brains, but we can't. What I try to do is imagine that I'm sinking into the sensations more and more with every exhale, which usually starts reducing the strength of these emotions. There's like a softening that can happen when you just say, yeah, I'll feel this, no resistance. I will feel it without needing to go into analyzing mode or problem solving mode. I'll just let my body do its thing and I'll stay connected to it. Because most of us learned in childhood that it wasn't safe to feel our feelings, and that's why we're so quick to go to our brain, because we dissociate from the physical sensations in our bodies and we just live up here because that feels like, you know, a refuge, even though that can often do more harm than good. You would be amazed at how many people you ask to tell you how they're feeling, and they'll say, I just feel like blah, 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 blah. And they'll just go into like the mental story around what they're feeling. And what they're feeling is like, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling frustrated. You know, we tend to have this thing in our society where we talk about our feelings through the lens of the stories our brain writes about the feelings rather than the feelings themselves, because we are very disconnected from our bodies in the West, I would say. Neurologists have found that the physiological lifespan of an emotion in the body and brain is around 90 seconds. When we don't add mental fuel to our emotional fire, most intense emotions can go away surprisingly quickly. But this basically never happens because most of us have zero training when it comes to allowing emotions to pass through us. So they stick around for a lot longer, and I found that that's like kind of how it is for a while. By the way, I'm not saying that this practice of connecting to emotions in the body properly is about wanting them to go away, because I think you need to operate from a place of, okay, I'm just going to notice what's happening, accept what's going on here, and just be with it. The grounding process I just described, as far as I'm concerned, is like it when it comes to feeling your feelings. Like, it's the secret to life, though there's like all kinds of variations to it. But there is another wonderful piece. When we properly connect to our emotions like that, what we often find is that we have access to greater wisdom, and we can get a better sense of what we genuinely need from ourselves. Because a lot of the time we just stay in that very cerebral space, and we can easily fall victim to acting in ways that are really just us trying to resist our emotions and not actually process them. For example, when I was a new little ex-Mormon, I would have these really overwhelming feelings of like fear or sadness come up, and I would be so in my head that what I felt driven to do in those moments was like start a debate with someone online. And that did kind of help my content creation career. But it wasn't great for actually getting to know my emotions any better and learning to process them in a healthy, more complete way. It just reinforced to my body that it wasn't safe to properly feel what I was feeling. I needed to do something to try and like escape or change how I was feeling. I think a lot of the time we think that reactionary moves like posting online when we're feeling angry are us processing things, and they can be a part of healthy processing, and they're not inherently reactionary, but they're not a replacement for the really simple core work of learning to actually feel your feelings as they manifest in your body. Am I explaining this in a way that resonates? I will often do that grounding exercise I just described with my coaching clients, and I'm not kidding, 80 to 90% of the time, people cry while they're doing it, even though it's just a very simple exercise. They're just breathing and connecting to physical sensations that emotions are made up of. But it's something we do so rarely in our society because we're so wired for distracting ourselves from the core reality of our emotions. And there's just this beautiful connection and sense of trust that you can build with yourself when you get comfortable grounding yourself in your feelings. I will often also ask people to ask their bodies what they need from them at the end of a grounding exercise. And it's truly amazing how much people can get out of asking that question while they're in that grounded state. It really is like a listening to the still small voice experience. And I think we often get much more simple and sensible answers to the question, what do I need, when we're not operating from like a frenzied, overly mental place. And I say that as someone who really values skepticism and logic and evidence-based thinking and thinking in general. I just think that when it comes to healthily processing emotions when leaving a high-demand religion that essentially demanded you be disconnected from them, it's a really smart move to learn to connect to what emotions actually feel like on a physical level. Because that's something we would have all ideally learned in childhood, but because we grew up in societies that are afraid of emotions and obsessed with distracting us from them, we didn't, and we suffer because of it. Another thing I want to bring up when talking about learning to feel your feelings is that anger is usually how we avoid sitting with sadness. Now, I know I've been and am the biggest advocate for allowing yourself to feel anger, because it is a very normal, healthy thing to feel in life generally, but also when leaving a religion like Mormonism that lied to you your whole life. However, anger is usually not the core emotion. It's usually sadness or fear, in my experience. Anger can just kind of feel like a safer emotion to feel than sadness, because it usually inspires action, or at least a kind of energy or movement that is somewhat easier to feel than sadness. It's like almost more empowering to feel angry than sad sometimes, But for me, I've found a lot of value in discovering what's behind my anger when it comes up, whether that's fear of being abandoned or just deep grief that an organization I once loved is not open-hearted enough to genuinely care about gay teens killing themselves. Being able to sit with whatever emotions come up without needing to act on them is really the most empowering thing, because it means you're no longer at the mercy of those emotions. You can be in control of your reactions to them. You're less at risk of being swept up in a current of distraction or displacement or projection or whatever else, all the stuff that ruins our lives and relationships. So that's on feeling your feelings, and I wanted to talk about this one first because I feel like it's the firm foundation that everything else is built on. And if you try to skip it, everything else that comes with a faith crisis is going to be a lot harder, in my opinion. We want to believe that we can solve everything in our brains, but I don't think it's wise. The brain is not that good Our bodies are entire systems, and the system as a whole has greater intelligence than just one part of it with all of its nonsense conditioning. Like, the brain is not a super accurate computer, it is subject to a lot of nonsense. A book I really recommend to people who are wanting to deepen their relationships with themselves and better learn how to feel and honor their feelings is Inner Bonding by Margaret Poole. I've recommended this book so many times. Sorry if I'm being annoying and you've heard me say it a million times, but it's been so right on the money for so many people. So if you're looking for something in that vein, give it a go. I'll link it in the description box. She does use mildly woo-woo language sometimes, but I wouldn't let that bother you. I know I've talked about this a lot on this channel, so if you're having to hear me repeat the same stuff you've heard me say before, I apologize. Maybe the universe wants you to hear it again. Who's to say? As most of us know, high demand religions are not about boundaries. They essentially don't want you to have healthy boundaries because they want you to be psychologically dependent on the organization and to view the group's leader as the ultimate authority. And boundaries are all about making yourself the authority on your own life, so it's not a good marriage for them. Boundaries are how we set limits on what we're willing to put up with in life, and they are there to serve us. The most basic framework for boundaries is, if you do X, I will do Y. It's you telling other people what you will and won't accept in terms of their treatment of you. But not because you're trying to control others, because you're trying to protect your own inner space and what you can and can't accept in your relationships. People can still choose to do whatever they want. You can't control them, obviously, but there are going to be consequences if they cross your lines because you're prioritizing your own well-being and not allowing things that harm you to go unchecked. For example, when you're really in the thick of a painful faith crisis or the aftermath of one, it might be really triggering to have your parents send you talks from General Conference. So you might need to set a boundary and say, hey, I love you guys. Know you're just trying to help in your own little way, but if you send me General Conference talks anymore, I will not be responding to them. Or maybe even something like, if you cannot spend time with me without trying to convince me to come back to church, I will not be able to spend time with you because that's not healthy for me right now. You honestly don't have to explain why you're setting a boundary, but like, if you're up for it, try to do it in the simplest way you can, I would say. Now, because Mormonism does not value boundaries and LDS people have often never been taught about healthy boundaries, it is likely that some believers will try to cross your boundaries. They'll do things you've told them you're not comfortable with, and that's why you have to be firm in what the second piece of your boundary is. So if your parents send you General Conference talks after you've told them that that's a boundary cross for you, you need to stick to your guns and not engage with them. If your parents continue to try and convince you to come back to church every time you spend time with them, and that's, really getting to you, and you've clearly communicated to them that you're not comfortable with that, you need to take time away from them until they can learn to honor that boundary. People who haven't learned about boundaries can often have quite extreme reactions to someone trying to set a perfectly healthy boundary, but you need to keep in mind that it's not on you. Don't fall into guilt traps they try and set or compromise your boundaries because setting them is hard and people try and make you feel bad about it. Like, you gotta stick to your guns. You're American. You're good at sticking to your guns. You can do it. So I know some of you aren't American. Hopefully, if you're spending time really connecting to yourself, like we talked about in that first section of this video, what boundaries you need to set will become pretty clear to you. But it might take a little bit of trial and error. Everything's a journey, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you'll need fewer boundaries the more you heal, as things won't disturb you as much internally. Or maybe you'll need more because you'll be much more attuned to how much things can disturb your inner space, and you don't want to do that. Something important I want to bring up is that you will not be able to set healthy boundaries effectively if you feel it is your job to control how others feel. I feel like people-pleasing could be its own video here, but at its core, people-pleasing, the belief that someone else's feelings are your responsibility. You can obviously be supportive of people when they're going through difficult feelings, but you can't take them on as your own. And people who routinely expect others to fix their emotions for them because they can't handle them themselves are codependent. If you're compromising your well-being to try and change how someone else feels because it's intolerable to you that they're feeling that way, you're entering dangerous territory. One way I see this come up a lot for ex-Mormons is in trying to come out to their loved ones as not believing anymore in a way that will immunize them against certain negative reactions. So people will ask, like, how can I tell my parents I'm leaving the church without their opinion of me changing? And I've said this before in a recent video on this channel. I think it was a collab with Nuance Ho that I just did. But you can't operate from this belief that you can control how other people feel about you. There are obviously better and worse ways to communicate things like the fact that you're leaving the church, but we are dealing with something that is so deeply emotional for people and so tied up in their perceived sense of self that you have to accept the possibility that people's reactions to you leaving the church may be really shit. Needing to maintain this certain image in the eyes of your family can really easily lend itself to self-betrayal because you're putting their feelings above your own reality, which, again, dangerous territory, and often just not even that effective. I think it just makes things muddier because I don't think you can hide your truth that well for long. I think it's generally better to be as honest as you can be without feeling the need to over-explain yourself to people who truly aren't interested in understanding you because it's too threatening to them. Obviously, if being honest is not a safe option for you, that's a different story, but if it is and you're an independent adult, I think it is the ideal route. I don't think hiding your coffee maker when your parents come over is ideal, but I do understand that you might need more time to process things and like get grounded in yourself before you feel ready to have certain conversations. So everything I'm saying comes with caveats. It's just some of my general advice. I want to talk about habits next, which might feel a little bit random after the last two things we've talked about, but I don't know how to talk about navigating anything in life healthily without talking about habits. In Mormonism, the habits that are emphasized are generally things that are going to lead to continued psychological dependence on the church, like praying, reading scriptures, listening to the prophet's words regularly, and not ingesting anything that might give you a non-church-based hit of dopamine, unless it's sugar. Or guns. You can eat a gun. Now, obviously, there are Mormons who have really good habits in terms of nutrition and movement and spending time in nature. Like, the church doesn't condemn those things. There are talks and teachings that do emphasize the importance of, like, looking after your body and being a good steward of nature once in a while. But I would say that truly healthy habits are not particularly emphasized in Mormonism. And I would even argue that adherence to Mormonism is an unhealthy habit in and of itself. Because all their healthy habits in Mormonism are like secondary to those primary habits like praying and reading scriptures, right? Which is the psychological dependency piece. I think it is madness to expect to navigate something as mentally and physically intense as having your whole worldview and potentially community collapse healthily without thinking about habits. If we are deficient in nutrients, for example, we will feel the effects of being deficient in those nutrients. And as healing from a faith crisis is a full-on experience, I think we need to do everything we can to give our bodies and brains what they need in order to thrive, because it is just massively traumatic losing your religion, and your body and brain has a massive task ahead of it. Now, obviously take this advice generally. I'm not here to play nutritionist, and I can't speak to your circumstances and what's possible for you. But whatever you can do to try and help your body out, try and do it. Because you are going to have a harder time healing and learning to thrive again if, like, you haven't eaten anything all day, you know? If you're not prioritizing your sleep as much as you can, you'll feel the negative effects of that. Same with not going outside, not making time for social connection, not moving your body. You guys know what healthy habits are. I'm not breaking any ground. But I know how easy it is to neglect all of these things when you're grieving or when you're furious or when your parents' opinion of you feels like the most important thing in the world. Caring for yourself is a massive deal. And now that you're not dependent on a high demand religion, I think you should prioritize caring for yourself more than ever before. You need to basically parent yourself, you know, put yourself to bed, make yourself eat a meal, ideally one that contains nutrients. Spend a lot of time off your phone. Don't let these things fall by the wayside if they don't have to, you know? Something that kind of saved my life post-faith transition was I would get on the treadmill for 30 minutes a day and speed walk while listening to an episode of the My Dad Wrote a Porno podcast, which I just fell in love with. And it was this one way that I was able to show up for myself and find humor every day and like this sense of empowerment, despite the fact that everything else felt so uncertain, so scary. So I'd say try and find what that thing is for you, or multiple things. It may not be that it makes you feel much better in the moment, but I think little habits like that over time can really make a big difference in how we feel about ourselves and life. Not to be annoying, unsolicited suggestion, but I think stretching is really underrated. The Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman recently did a fantastic podcast on why stretching is essential for all of us, which I'll link in the description box for anyone who's interested. I've been talking about this one so much lately online. I think it's really important to get comfortable asking yourself what you want after leaving a high demand religion, because in religions like Mormonism, what you want always has to fit within certain prescriptive boxes, and you are routinely taught that a lot of the things you might want are from Satan, which is really just a wonderful foundation on which to build a life. I've learned from being a coach for the last 3 years that it is often surprisingly difficult for people to honestly confront their desires after leaving Mormonism without self-judgment, which is funny because the LDS Church is always teaching us that people who leave are hedonists who just want to do whatever they want, but that's not what I see. I think people are actually very hesitant to even acknowledge the full range of their desires a lot of the time, let alone act on them. Honestly, confronting your true desires in life can be extremely difficult and uncomfortable if you grew up in a high demand religion, as there are a lot of mechanisms set up in your brain to step in and tell you that you're selfish or wrong for wanting something that is not in alignment with what you've been taught you should want, or in alignment with the way your life is currently set up. I feel like this is especially true if you're a woman, because women are subjugated in Mormonism. And it can feel extremely terrifying to reckon with desires that may ask you to reconfigure your life. Divorce being the most obvious one that comes to mind off the top of my head. I've been rebranding as the goddess of divorce recently. I don't know, I'm really passionate about divorce. I know that I feel like we've got a lot of voices in the ex-mom community who are, you know, talking about how to keep the family together after a faith crisis. And like, obviously, yeah, if that's like what you want to do, that's what you should do. There's no one path, but I just feel like we don't have enough voices of people saying, like, it is okay to get a divorce. You can healthily co-parent children without being romantically involved with each other. And the idea that you would need to feign romantic interest in someone that you don't feel it for the sake of children, madness to me. I don't think it's healthy. I think, you know, like, divorce obviously can be a traumatic event for kids, but I don't think divorce is inherently traumatic necessarily. However, I think there is an enormous amount of damage that is done when kids watch parents live unfulfilling lives and, you know, like, not like each other. I already know I'm going to get comments about this. Don't really want this to be the theme of the video, so I'm just going to move on. I think one of the best things you can do after going through a faith crisis is stop buying into shame-based ideas about what you should and shouldn't want, and start taking an honest inventory of your desires. You obviously don't have to act on every desire you ever have, but the more comfortable you get with genuinely asking yourself, what do you want? In small and big moments, and not what other people want for you, the better you'll get at discerning between desires that are maybe more fleeting and potentially not valuable for you to act on, and desires that really come from a deep within your soul place. Soul being a linguistic device I'm using. Do not leave a comment. What are some desires you felt ashamed of after leaving Mormonism? Let me know in the comments. There are a lot of things you likely didn't get the chance to learn about if you grew up in a high demand religion or rigid ideology of any kind. I've heard a lot of people say that growing up Mormon, throughout their education, they didn't learn about evolution, climate change, nutrition. We've already talked about how most of us didn't learn how to healthily process our emotions. There's just a lot for all of us. And now that you don't have to read the same 18th century fanfic all the time for the rest of your life, over and over, you got a lot more time to actually sit down, learn what you want to learn stuff that will actually benefit your life, you know? After my faith crisis, I got really into learning about evolution, which started because I got massively into David Attenborough documentaries, highly recommend. And I started reading a lot of books about psychology, why humans are the way that they are, like Sapiens, The Idiot Brain, The Body Keeps the Score, off the top of my head. And also books that focus on healthy sexuality, like Come As You Are, The Erotic Mind, Sex at Dawn. There's a lot of good stuff out there that can change your life in a much healthier and more all-encompassing way than some white guys' Native American stories. I think people who have left high demand religions can often be prone to black and white fanatical thinking. So you gotta stay humble, you know? Like, there's probably gonna be a lot of times where you think you've learned the single most important thing in the world, and maybe you have, but maybe you just haven't, and this is one layer of many other possible layers. This is a major subtweet at myself for the last 7 years, and my stupid little ego that likes to think is so smart. I don't know about you guys, but I have found that the older I get, the less intelligent I realize I am, and that's quite a freeing feeling, to be honest. Let the sexist men leave their little comments. I don't desire their tiny-brained approval of my tiny brain. Don't need it. In the spirit of learning, I also want to take this opportunity to recommend the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg. I think it provides an incredibly useful framework for having difficult conversations with believing family members and other human beings in general. I just think it's a great book. Also, the book Conscious Loving. I really loved that one. There's a lot of good relationship books and some mediocre ones. I think that deepening our connection to nature is one of the best things we can do in this life, because it's so easy to get swallowed up in human civilization and lose touch with what people throughout history have described as a divine connection to the oneness of all things. That's so rich and fulfilling and almost magical when we feel it. If that sounds too abstract for you, I just think there's no better way to detach from our own little man-made dramas that we play out externally as a way to play out our own inner psychic drama than being in nature. And then when we re-enter the nonsense of human civilization, we notice birds we didn't notice before, and we feel connected to the tiny ways that the seasons change the flora and fauna in our areas in a way we didn't before. And we take the time to actually look our cats in their eyes, and we feel this energy of like, yeah, we are here together. This present moment is what's actually real. I'm so glad I got out of my own head for long enough to be here with you in it. Thanksy. I love you so much, and I'll protect you until the day I die. Thank you for coming into my life, you beautiful Zen master. Would you like the salmon fancy feast or the turkey fancy feast for dinner? I guess if people don't feel motivated to connect to nature, they don't, and I'm not really sure what I can say in this section of the video to convince anyone who's not felt that pull. But I guess I'm just hoping to be one tiny data point that your brain maybe takes note of in case you're ever feeling weird and you're not sure what to do with yourself, and a little trip into nature that you normally wouldn't be inclined to take is just what you need. And on this day, just what you choose. It's way too easy to think that things matter way more than they actually do when we don't have an ideally ever deepening connection to nature, in my experience. And a tree won't validate your bullshit, you know? It's good for you. What did we think of this video? Did we have an okay time? Did any new gears start turning? Did we just enjoy the sound of someone familiar talking to us while we do our dishes? These are all valid experiences, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Those of you who are further along in your faith journey, what advice would you give to yourself if you could go back in time? Those of you who are more in the new thick of it, how's it going? Communicate with the group in the name of connection, in the name of the algorithm, in the name of connection. For those of you who are interested in faith transitions coaching with me, I'll leave a link to my website in the description box. And for those of you who are interested in supporting this channel and our efforts to dismantle harmful ideologies and have a nice time online, I will also leave a link to our Patreon and other ways you can support us and be part of an intimate community of people navigating similar things to you. I love our Patreon. Thank you for being here. I am so proud of you for having a faith crisis, for deconstructing a harmful, untrue worldview that was no doubt agony to deconstruct. That's not the case for everyone. I always talk about faith crisis through the lens of the person who just like suffered their way to the truth, but it's also equally valid to have just woke up one day and been like, this doesn't seem right, this isn't for me, you know, it's all good. Well done. However you got out, well done. It's huge. I am looking forward to reading what you guys have to say, and I'll see you soon.